Welcome back to Super Recaps. In this video, I will show you the 2019 psychological thriller movie known as Joker. Watch out for spoilers ahead. The movie starts in a place called Gotham City, where Arthur Fleck, the main character, is getting ready for work at his company's office. He's putting on face paint as he works as a party clown. He puts two fingers in his mouth and forces a downturned smile. Moments later, we find him on the street, dancing with a sign promoting the shop he works at. But soon, some kids come by and steal the sign from him. They run away with the sign and Arthur pursues them through the city until he finds them in an alley, where the kids smash the sign on his head and begin kicking and punching him once he has fallen to the ground. Arthur visits his therapist after finishing his work. He laughs for a few seconds and comments on how difficult things are out in the real world. The therapist then asks if he's been writing in his journal. He gives her the journal, explaining that he's been using it as a journal as well as a joke diary because he wants to be a stand-up comedian. When the therapist reads it, she comes across distressing words like, "I just hope my death makes more sense than my life." She returns the journal to Arthur and asks how coming to these appointments makes him feel. Arthur says he has a better time being locked in the hospital and recalls repeatedly hitting his head against the door of his room. He asks the therapist if the doctor can give him more medication, and she informs him that he is already on 7. Arthur responds that he no longer wants to feel bad. Once the therapy ends, Arthur takes the bus to go home. Because the child in front of him is staring at him, he begins making funny faces at him, earning him a reprimand from his mother. Arthur bursts out laughing, and when the mother is offended, he hands her a card explaining that he laughs due to a neurological condition. He goes to the pharmacy after getting off the bus to pick up his medication before heading home. He checks his mailbox and then heads up to his apartment, which he shares with his mother, Penny Fleck. She goes on to ask him if they've received any mail, and when he tells her they haven't, she wonders if her former boss, Thomas Wayne, hasn't been getting her letters. Wayne is a busy businessman, Arthur reminds her and tells her to eat. He cuts up her food for her and they watch the Murray Franklin talk show together. While watching the show, he begins daydreaming and imagines himself in Franklin's audience, where the host notices him and asks him to stand up and introduce himself. Arthur tells Franklin how he looks after his mother, which Franklin respects, so he invites Arthur to come to the stage, which Arthur does while everyone claps for him, and they hug. Arthur smiles at this brief fantasy. At work the next day, we notice Arthur's body is covered in bruises. Randall, a coworker, meets him and decides to give Arthur his gun after hearing about the beating. Another coworker, Gary, informs Arthur that their boss is searching for him. When Arthur visits him in his office, he is told they have received another complaint about him disappearing and failing to return the sign. Arthur clarifies that he was robbed, but his boss thinks he's lying because why would anyone steal a poster? And so the boss tells him he'll have to deduct the sign from his paycheck before scolding Arthur, who is just smiling quietly. After the meeting, he goes outside and kicks a garbage can to take out his frustration. When Arthur returns to his apartment later that day, his neighbor Sophie Dumond and her daughter are in the elevator with him. When the elevator comes to a halt, Sophie remarks on how run down the building is and makes a shooting motion with her hand. When they arrive at their floor and exit the elevator, Arthur smiles at her and makes the shooting gesture too. Arthur is bathing Penny in the next scene. She continues to inquire about the letters because she believes Wayne was a good man who would not appreciate seeing them live like this. Arthur tells her not to worry about money because his stand-up show will soon make its way to the big clubs. But Penny says that she thought to be a comedian, the person had to be funny. After putting his mother to bed, Arthur watches a movie and practices with his new gun for a few hours. When a song starts playing on the television, he begins dancing to it while fantasizing about talking to a girl, and he ends up accidentally shooting the gun. When his mother wakes up and inquires about the noise, he informs her that it is simply a war movie playing on television. Arthur follows Sophie around town the next day, even while on public transportation. He goes to see a stand-up show in the evening to take notes, and keeps working on them after returning to his apartment later, when he writes, "The worst part of having a mental illness is people expect you to behave as if you don't." The doorbell rings, interrupting his writing, and Arthur opens the door to find Sophie. She asks him if he's been stalking her, and he confirms it, so she wonders if he was planning to rob her. He says he could do it right now, and she laughs and tells him he's hilarious, and thus, Arthur invites her to his stand-up show. The next day, Arthur works as a clown in a hospital. His gun falls to the floor during his performance. Later that evening, he gets a call from his boss, who expresses his displeasure with the incident. Arthur tries to persuade him that the gun was just a prop, but his boss does not believe him and informs him that Randall said that Arthur tried to buy a gun from him last week. He fires Arthur, and in anger, Arthur smashes his head against the phone booth glass. He gets on the subway to go home. He notices 3 men in suits are bothering a girl. When Arthur bursts out laughing, the woman stands up and walks away, and the men start to walk towards him while one of the guys begins singing, "Send in the clowns." They remove his wig and bag, perplexed as to why he laughs, but when he tries to tell them about his condition and reclaim his belongings, they start to hit him and then throw him on the floor to kick him. To defend himself, he draws his gun and shoots 2 of the men. When the subway stops at the station, the third one runs away and exits the car, but Arthur follows him and eventually shoots him too. His ears are ringing and he realizes what he's done, quickly running out of the station, through the streets, and into the park's restrooms. He dances in there after a brief panic attack. He returns to his apartment building moments later, knocks on Sophie's door, and as soon as she opens it, he rushes in and kisses her. The next day, Arthur arrives at work to collect his belongings and overhears his co-workers discussing the news of the previous day's subway shooting. They also try to console him, and Randall also tries to sympathize with him, but his hypocrisy enrages Arthur, so he lets everyone know that his gun was used in the crime. Arthur punches the clock before leaving, making it fall and break. Arthur returns to his apartment after finishing his last few pills and sits with his mother to watch television. Thomas Wayne has made headlines because the men who were murdered worked for his company, and when inquired about the murderer, Wayne calls the murderer a coward and says it makes sense he was wearing a clown mask to hide his face. He considers all people who do nothing with their lives to be clowns. After a few days, Arthur returns to his therapist. He tries to tell her that he finally feels like he exists and that people are starting to notice him, but she cuts him off to say that the government has cut their funding and that this is their final session. She only offers an apology when he asks who he will have to speak with about his medication. Later that night, Arthur is backstage at a bar, waiting for his turn to perform his stand-up show, and Sophie is in the audience. When it's his turn, he walks onto the stage and begins laughing hysterically, and even when he does manage to recite some jokes, they fail miserably. He leaves the bar with Sophie after the show, and as they walk together, he notices the newspapers mentioning the murders with a clown face on the front page. Sophie even remarks how the clown is a hero, making Arthur happy. Arthur notices someone wearing a clown mask similar to the drawings on the papers when a car passes by. He returns to his apartment after dinner with Sophie, where his mother has fallen asleep while watching the TV. He wakes her up and tells her to go to bed, but before going to her room she tells him she's written another letter. Arthur decides to read the letter and gets angry at Penny after discovering he is Wayne's illegitimate son. She locks herself in the bathroom because she's scared of Arthur's reaction and explains that she and Wayne were in love but had to keep their relationship a secret, and she couldn't say anything because of the documents they made her sign. The next day, while riding the train, Arthur comes across a photograph of the Waynes in the newspaper. He soon finds himself at the Wayne mansion and sees a young Bruce Wayne playing in the garden. Arthur goes near and begins performing magic tricks for him, but Bruce isn't pleased. Arthur asks for his and puts his fingers in Bruce's mouth through the gate, to make him smile. Alfred abruptly interrupts them, pushing Bruce aside and threatening to call the cops. When Arthur informs him that he is Penny's son and wishes to see Mr. Wayne because he knows everything, Alfred laughs at him and responds that his mother was insane. Furious, Arthur tries to choke him through the gate, but when he sees Bruce watching, he lets Alfred go. When he returns home in the evening, he discovers emergency services transporting his mother to the hospital, and he boards the ambulance to accompany her. Arthur is approached by 2 cops while waiting outside the hospital. They say they were talking to Penny at the time of her stroke, and now they want to question Arthur about the subway shooting. Arthur tells them his gun was only a prop and goes back to the hospital. Sophie is keeping him company in the room. When she leaves, Arthur plays the Franklin show on television, and he is offended and heartbroken to see clips of his stand-up show being used to mock him. Later, when he returns to his apartment, he sees on television that people are rioting in clown masks because Wayne referred to them as clowns. Arthur joins the protests, and when he arrives, he uses a conflict between police and the public to sneak inside the movie theater to find Wayne, and he keeps an eye on Wayne whilst watching the movie. After Wayne leaves the theater bathroom, Arthur follows him to ask about Penny. Wayne claims she was insane and that he never touched her. He says that Arthur was adopted. Arthur isn't convinced and becomes enraged and starts to laugh. Before leaving, Wayne punches him. When Arthur returns to his apartment, he ignores a police call, goes inside the refrigerator, and spends the whole night inside. The following day, he receives a call from Franklin's team asking if he wants to appear in the show, which he undoubtedly accepts. He then takes the bus to Arkham State Hospital, where he requests his mother's file. The receptionist says that she was indeed psychotic and even harmed her child, but he refuses to give the file to Arthur, so he steals it and intends to read it after hiding. The file proves that Penny lied and that Arthur was adopted. She also raised Arthur with an abusive boyfriend who was later arrested. Arthur goes back home, visibly upset, and unexpectedly enters Sophie's apartment. When Sophie finds him, she is terrified and asks him to leave, and as Arthur recalls their time together, we find out that all of it had just been his imagination all along. He tells Penny the next day that his life is a comedy, not a tragedy, before suffocating her with a pillow. Later, Arthur is at his home, preparing for the show. He dyes his hair green and begins applying makeup after practicing his speech, but he is cut short by a ringing doorbell. He grabs a pair of scissors and stuffs them into his pants before opening the door to greet Gary and Randall, who have come to see him after hearing about Penny's death. Randall is concerned because Arthur has his gun and the cops have been questioning clowns. Arthur reacts by stabbing him with scissors and hitting him. Gary gets scared and wants to leave, but Arthur lets him go without retaliating because he was the only person who had ever been nice to him. Arthur leaves his house after wearing a new suit, and cops on the street spot him. He starts running away and enters the subway, which is packed with clown mask-wearing protesters. The cops pursue him, leaping from car to car. While cops chase him, Arthur steals a clown mask from a guy, which makes a fight breaks out. In the midst of all this chaos, the police accidentally shoot a citizen, and when the subway arrives at the station, everyone jumps on the officers, allowing Arthur to flee unseen. He arrives at the studio a few moments later. Franklin comes by to greet him and ask for a clean show. Arthur accepts, promising that his clown makeup isn't political, and requests to be introduced as Joker. Soon after, he is summoned to the stage, where he enters dancing. Arthur kisses a guest and assures everyone that his getup isn't political. He attempts to tell a joke about death, for which he is chastised. Since he has nothing to lose, he confesses to being the subway killer. Arthur gives a long speech about how the system fails the little people and how Franklin is the same for bringing him to the show to mock him. After the end of his speech, he shoots Franklin. Arthur is arrested soon after the show. While in the police car, he witnesses the riots in the streets, where people are dressed in clown masks. He's describing everything as beautiful when the car suddenly collides with an ambulance, knocking him out. The person driving the car had been a protester, and with the help of the other protesters, Arthur is taken out of the vehicle and placed on top of the hood. Elsewhere, a protester follows the Waynes who are leaving the theater. He tells Wayne he deserves this and kills him and his wife, leaving young Bruce alone with his parents' bodies. The scene returns to Arthur, who wakes up to find the protesters cheering for him, so he gets up on top of the car and does a little dance for them. With the blood coming from his nose, he draws a larger smile around his mouth. Later, we discover Arthur has been admitted to Arkham State Hospital. While the therapist is checking on him, he begins to laugh. When she asks why, he responds that she wouldn't understand and starts singing, "That's life." The film concludes with Arthur leaving the hospital while dancing in the hallway, with bloody footprints trailing behind him. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and press the bell icon to get new video updates.